Hello, how you doing? And welcome back to the channel. England's World Cup squad, the forwards. That's what I'm talking about in this video. I did a video a couple of days ago where I spoke about the England backline and the players at this moment in time that I would take. So in this video, it's all about the guys up front. So make sure you drop a comment down below. Plenty of you did on the last video telling me the selections that you disagree with, players that you would rather see be on the plane to France. But make sure you comment down below, because when it comes to selection, there's always a big debate around it. Also, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel as well, I would massively appreciate it. But let's get into it. Okay, so in that video the other day, I named 15 players in terms of the back line. England are going to take a squad of 33 to the World Cup. So I've got 18 players to name here. And this is subject to change. I think I also mentioned it the other day, where this is just what I'm thinking at this moment in time before the World Cup warm-ups. I would imagine that my opinion on a lot of these players and the squad will change over time before we get to the World Cup in France. But with the domestic season in England having finished, I think it's a good time just to focus on this. Give us something to debate, something to talk about, and get excited about the World Cup happening, which kicks off in September. So let's start off at number 8. I think it's probably one of the easier positions, I think, maybe partly because there's a bit of a lack of options, but I'll flash them up on screen, the names that I jotted down of Billy Vunipola, Sam Simmonds, Alex Dombrandt, Zach Mercer, and Tom Willis. Now, my instinct is you go with Billy Vunipola, because in terms of a power game, I think he's the best option for England. We've seen Alex Dombrandt have quite a lot of opportunities at number 8 recently, particularly in that Six Nations, and I just don't think he's ever really been able to establish himself. He doesn't necessarily look like he is England's number 1, number 8, and he should be going forward. And it's similar to a lot of the other Quins players actually that have come in and out of the squad, whether it be Marcus Smith, whether it be Danny Kerr. They look almost to be a different beast in the Premiership than they have done at international level. Whether that's the game plan not suiting their style of play or various other reasons, I just don't think Alex Dombrandt has quite stood up to take that jersey and make it his own. So I'm leaning towards Billy Vunipola because I like the power game he can give you. Maybe you can get 65 minutes out of him and then you have another option coming off the bench. And honestly, I'd be happy with a Sam Simmonds. I'll be happy with a Zach Mercer. Obviously, Sam Simmonds gives you a bit more of an explosive option if you can find some space. Zach Mercer, brilliant feat for a number 8 at getting around and beating defenders. But I'm tempted to go for Tom Willis because when he played for Wasps, he was always, you felt, a little underappreciated within English rugby. Didn't get a look in with the international side. And maybe now is the time. Maybe he is a good option, a good all-round number 8 of those options down there to come off the bench for England and finish out the game if Vunipola goes off. That's what I'm thinking at this moment in time. But certainly, as I say, Sam Simmonds, Zach Mercer, I'll be quite happy with either of those guys being on the plane. Let's continue in the back row, moving on to the flankers. So quite a lot of options here. Courtney Lawes, Tom Curry, Lewis Ludlam, Ben Curry. Most people would say that Courtney Lawes is probably nailed on for a lot of them. The reason I'm not selecting him at this moment in time isn't because of how good he is, because we know when Courtney Lawes gets a run of form how good he is, and particularly because he gives you he's a 6, but he could potentially shift into the second row if you had injuries. He's a bit more versatile. I'm not picking him for one reason, and that's concerns about his health. In that you look at this year, he's had so many injuries. He's been out with concussions. He's picked up other injuries as well. I'm not sure right now whether I could say he definitely has to go to France, because I'm not sure whether you can rely on him. Now, this is one that is definitely subject to change, because if he gets through the World Cup warm-ups, looks to be playing well, is fit, is healthy, can get through a full game or close to it, depending on what the England management need, I would happily have Courtney Lawes in my squad for the World Cup. But right now, I'm not picking him. The names that immediately I jotted down were Tom Curry and Jack Willis. I think both of them are, in my opinion, almost dead certs for France and for the World Cup. Tom Curry's so good. We know how good he was at the 2019 World Cup, and the 4 years since then, I think has just continued to establish himself as one of the best flankers in the Northern Hemisphere. So he goes, and Jack Willis goes as well. I liked what we saw of him in the Six Nations. He brings something different at the breakdown, which England don't possess with too many other people. Ben Earl probably is one, which I'll speak about in just a second. But Jack Willis, I think he has gone over to France. He's been playing pretty well from what I'm able to gather. I'd have him in there because of what the danger he gives you with the Jackal in particular. And speaking of Ben Earl, he's another one. He gives you The threat at the breakdown, he has been consistently so good in the Premiership for Saracens, hasn't he, over the years, picking up Premiership Players of the Year. He's explosive as well if you can get him in space. He's such a danger. So Ben Earl goes as well for me. And then I've probably got two other spots realistically to select here. Right now, I'm leaning towards Lewis Ludlam. I've always liked him as a player. I like what he brought to the England team, even in some of the defeats they had in the Six Nations. I remember watching him against Scotland, and he brings the physicality. He does a lot of the dirty, ugly work that probably isn't that flash, but he does it really effectively and very consistently. So I like Ludlam. And then Tom Pearson is the other one, who is probably one of the favourites of English rugby at this moment in time. Great season for London Irish, so pivotal for them. A bit of a breakout year, really. I'd like to see him rewarded with a place at the World Cup. A few other names on that list that I probably haven't mentioned. Sam Underhill being an obvious one. Similar to Courtney Lawes, I just think he's been too injured. We know how good he is. I mean, as a tackler, he's one of the best tacklers probably in the Premiership, maybe the best that England possess, but I'm just not convinced on his injury track record. And then Ben Curry as well. When his brother keeps getting all the international caps, you feel kind of sorry for him. But yeah, I'll be tempted by Tom Curry. And also, I suppose with Ben Curry, we don't know what the deal is with the injury at the moment either, do we? Missing out at the end of the season, hamstring, that's a bit of a question mark. So those are my back row options. Lewis Ludlam, Tom Curry, Jack Willis, Ben Earl, Tom Pearson, along with Tom Willis and Billy Vunipola at number 8. Okay, second row. Again, list up on screen. Now, with this, Maro Itoje definitely goes. I think most people would say that, even though Itoje's form for England anyway hasn't necessarily been at the heights it once was. I still think Itoje is one of the first names on the team sheet. Then it's probably Ollie Chesham, right? I think over the Six Nations, most people were pretty pleased with Ollie Chesham and what he did in that second row. But then after that, I think it's wide open. I think there's options there. I personally would go for George Martin because I was at Gloucester, Leicester towards the end, well, kind of towards the end of the Premiership season, about 4 or 5 games to go. And he came off the bench and just looked really good, really threatening, good with ball in hand in terms of his carrying. So I'd be tempted to go with George Martin. But then after that, if I'm looking at 4 second row options, Joe Launchbury, Nick Asikwe, Johnny Hill, Dave Ribbons, any of those guys I would be happy with, in all honesty. I'm not swayed one way or another. And the England second row is actually quite an interesting part of their selection because I still think they've never quite been able to replace George Cruz. Like, do you remember when it was Maro Itoje and George Cruz? And they were just a brilliant combination. You then had Joe Launchbury coming off the bench. You had Courtney Lawes there, who could jump into the second row again if you wanted to, but was often on the flank. You just had options there for England, and it felt like a really secure position. I'm not convinced that's quite the case at the moment. I think the good thing is there are options. I just don't know what the pecking order of them is. So maybe you can put your views down below. I'm going Itoje, George Martin, Ollie Chesham. After that, I'm happy with a number of those guys. Okay, let's finish up with the front row because this is, I think, a really interesting area of selection for England because the starting front row, in my opinion, picks itself. It's Ellis Genge at loose head. It's either Jamie George or Luke Cowan-Dickie at hooker, depending which way you want to go and depending on Cowan-Dickie's fitness. And it's Kyle Sinclair at tight head. But particularly on the tight head side, after that, I'm just not sure who you go with. So first of all, on the loose head, as I say, I pick Ellis Genge. I'd then go with Bevan Rodd and Val Rapava-Ruskin. I think Mako Vunipola most likely will be selected, but I would just go with those other two guys, which is a little bit of a risk in terms of experience when we're looking towards a World Cup. But Rapava-Ruskin, I think, has been excellent for Gloucester. Bevan Rodd, I think, has been good for Sale. Perhaps hasn't quite had the levels of form that we've seen him previously, but even so, I would be tempted to go with him. As I say, I think Mako Vunipola will be involved. At hooker, you're going to go Jamie George and Luke Cowan-Dickie. If there's a spot, I'd love to find space for Theo Dan as well, because certainly the second half of the Premiership season, when you've watched Theo Dan, you've just thought, or I have anyway, he looks like England's next hooker. He's brilliant around the park, great with ball in hand. He hit a spiral 50-22 in the Premiership final, which everyone loved to see. What his scrummaging is like, maybe we'll wait and see. But I'd just like to see Theo Dan involved because I think he will have a future with England going forward. So I'd like to see him involved in some capacity now, but we'll wait and see. But as I say, tight head is really fascinating because Kyle Sinclair will start and then it's going to be Dan Cole, I think, most likely. I wouldn't go with that option, but I think Steve Borthwick will select Dan Cole in his front row or as a front row option. But after that, what do you go with? I mean, you've got Trevor Davison, Nick Shonut, Will Collier, Joe Hayes, Will Stewart, Harry Williams, Marcus Street, just to give you a list of options. If you're not taking Dan Cole, maybe it's Trevor Davison, someone like that, or a Will Collier. I'm honestly not sure. So I think tight head is probably the weakest area of the England team. Let's see what Borthwick ends up doing. As I say, I would imagine it's going to be Makavanapola as a replacement on the loose head. You'll have Dan Cole as a replacement on the tight head, and then maybe a few other guys underneath that. I think there's the potential. What I would do is probably do quite different at this moment in time. So I'd have Ellis Genge, Rapava Ruskin, Bevan Rod for the loose head, Jamie George, Theo Dan, Luke Cowan-Dickey as hookers, Kyle Sinclair, and then after that, Trevor Davison, Will Collier. Again, another position, a bit like that final second row spot. I'm just not sure on. The difference with the second rows is you could probably chuck a number of names at me and I'll be pretty happy with it. With tight head, I'm really not sure. So let me know in the comments down below what you make of the selection options, what you make of the names I've put forward. Who would you call up in place of that? And just a reminder, it's early days. The World Cup doesn't start for a couple of months. This is all very much subject to change, but it's just my thoughts at this moment in time. So drop a comment down below, like the video and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next one.